So how many people in here are involved in their companies in launching products or part of product development? Most people? All right, good. Good. So a little bit about myself and SEP. So we work with mostly Fortune 500 companies, large companies, all of which are bringing products to market, and we are either helping them write the software piece or are writing all of the software for them. And in doing that for 16 plus years, I've seen similar struggles across all these organizations that a lot of them are incorporating a lot of risk into the development process and don't even understand why. And it's costing them oftentimes millions of dollars on projects. And through that, just kind of realized, hey, they need a better way of managing and launching these products. And so what I want to talk about today is some simple tools that we're using right now with these companies to hopefully or to reduce their risk, and at the end show you some examples of where we have done that and sort of what the impact has been. Right? You can believe what I say on my slides, but I put that in there to tell you that understand your context, test in your context, understand what I'm saying and apply it, test it, verify that it's that what I'm saying is true, right? So launching products is risky, and companies fail far more times than they succeed. What makes it risky? In a article by David Cook, in a study they listed these 6 reasons for why companies struggle launching products or where the risk comes from. Let's look at some other examples. In a recent Strategies for Project Recovery report, they looked at 163 companies. The respondents managed about $200 million each per year, of which they said 37% were at risk. If you do the math, that means on average they face $74 million of at-risk projects every year. That's pretty huge, right? Some other painful examples. Levi Strauss was redoing their online commerce system, budgeted $5 million, it cost them $193 million. Hong Kong was redoing their airport, it cost the local economy some $600 million. In a tech review article, the largest ever conducted, roughly 1,500 projects, they looked at the actual data they had for around planning, what they had planned to spend, and then the actual results. On average, the cost overrun was about 27%. Not that big of a deal, probably. What they found that was so surprising to them was that 1 in 6 cost over 200%. And so if you've attended any Troy stuff, I know he talks about sort of this notion of the flaw of averages, right? The average sort of hides this enormous event. And I don't know about you guys, but if I think back to our company, yeah, we have some overruns and stuff on projects, but it's these that really kill us and impact us the most. And there's 1 or 2 going on in the course of a year. Anybody else? Does that jive? Yeah. So let's look at some other things here. So poorly defined applications contribute to 60% project failure rate, costing at least $30 billion every year. 60 to 80% of project failures can be attributed to poor requirements gathering, analysis, and management. 50% are rolled back out of production. 40 of the problems are found by end users. 25 to 40 of all the spending on projects is a result of waste or rework. And up to 80% of the budgets are consumed fixing self-inflicted problems. Right? That's sad, right? Here's the Standish report. We've all heard that, 70% of the features nobody uses. It's interesting if you look at this across time, though, regardless of whether you sort of agree with the numbers, it says to me that while agile and lean and processes and efficiencies may help, they haven't made a significant difference in the outcome, right? We've got a little better, but not substantially better, and companies are still losing lots of money every year in this endeavor. Right, so the game has changed. Today's customers demand more. They want better designs, more frequent updates, higher usability, and we see this with some of the companies we work with. We work with a lot of regulated industries, medical, aerospace. In the aerospace industry, engine manufacturers don't sell engines anymore. They lease them to the military, or they call it power by the hour. Customers are only paying when the engine's flying. And you can see Obamacare in the healthcare systems. It's pay for performance, right? Show me that you're improving the patient's care and we'll reimburse you. The market has changed and companies haven't. They're still using outdated processes and spending significant portions of their budget on non-value adding work. Right, so planning hasn't changed. Plans are still big and inflexible. They spent too much time trying to come up with a perfect plan. People think they need to ask for more than they can get. I don't know, a lot of our clients, the people driving the product specification, says if I ask for this much, I'll hopefully get this much, right? And because they know through history that the organization hasn't always delivered. Well, if you think about that though for a second, they ask for this much in hopes of getting this much. There's this much. Projects get behind schedule. They start cutting things because they overcommitted or asked for too much, and they start cutting back. And the business says, see, look, you didn't deliver. I knew you wouldn't deliver what I wanted. That's why I had to ask for more, right? It's this sort of negative cycle that's killing a lot of companies. And this is something I think interesting. Funding models for the most part haven't changed. You would think that large companies would be better suited to launch products than small startups, right? But there's this notion of the sort of the curse of too much capital. Funds are allocated up front for the most part in large quantities. The businesses become impatient and expect a payoff soon. They want to see results, and as a result, too much money creates this sort of confirmation bias. So instead of people testing their assumptions as they're going along with the product, they spend more time confirming what they already knew. People lose the interest of verifying, yeah, this still makes sense to continue spending money. They've been allocated money, they're going to spend it, and most of the time it's spent reconfirming what they already know. So what can we do? Won't launching products always involve some amount of uncertainty and risk? So the answer is yes. So one possible way, which is summed up from an old movie, Better Off Dead. How many people remember that movie? That's probably... All right, so in the movie, teaching his friend how to ski there, Charles says, go that way really fast. If something gets in your way, turn. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are still operating that way. I mean, they kind of say, oh, that's agile, right? We'll just go really fast one way, and if something comes up, we'll turn. Well, that to me was what causes these $1 million losses and huge budget overruns. There's something that we need to do better. So let's look at somebody who does spend a great deal of time managing uncertainty that's ingrained in their workforce, and that'd be the Marines. So in their manual for warfighting, they say this: by its nature, uncertainty invariably involves the estimation and acceptance of risk. Risk is inherent in war, right? Because we can never eliminate uncertainty, we must learn to fight effectively despite it. And that's what I think I'm working now with companies, is trying to help them fight effectively despite this. And one of the ways we can do this is with managing risk. So Bob oftentimes says this: risk is the lack of information, control, and time. And he gave me this analogy the other day I thought was really good. Bob Charette, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Peyton Manning when he played for the Colts. That's the only way I remember him. But if you think about a quarterback coming up to the line, that's a risky proposition. They're entering into a risky situation there. I mean, their injury, salary, whatever, right? So they come up to the line. The first thing he wants is information. The lack of information. If Peyton could get the defense to commit to what formation they're going to run, that was information, right? He lowered his risk of a positive outcome. Once he had information, control. You would often see Peyton motioning to receivers on the end or other wide outs and backs. He had control over the offense, and as long as he had that control, again, he could lower his risk. If he had the information but did nothing or could not control, or the receiver didn't know what he was saying, and half the time I don't think they did, but if they didn't know what he was saying, it wouldn't really matter, right, that he had control. So information control, and then time. Again, if he has the information, he's controlling the offense. If he doesn't give himself enough time to get the ball to the receiver, Dallas Clark or whoever, it didn't really matter, right? So by doing all these things, by reducing any of these things, he reduces the overall risk, and that's what we want to do. This is sort of an example of some information I got from a customer. They build medical devices, right? They're in the medical device industry. And this sort of shows kind of a summary of projects from 2004 to 2013. The blue sort of represents this phase of defining what to build. Right? A lot of time spent defining and discovering requirements, customer requirements documents, use cases, prototypes, figuring out what to build. And then the green is the actual development and verification. And verification, I can tell you, verification validation in an FDA environment is very expensive. It's probably half of the development. So you can cut most of these green bars in half and say about half was development, the other half was verification and validation, and that doesn't even include the marketing or product or getting it to market, right? So they were spending an enormous amount of money of projects in this upfront phase. And what's interesting, back in 2004, they started to build an application that they were going to go on the web that would help them talk to their devices, right? They weren't on the web, they were getting on the web. They spent all this time defining it, they started developing it, and they ended up canceling the project. Why? Because a couple of years later, or the next year, there was this new thing coming out that was going to be on the web, and it had a bunch of other features, and so they decided to wait, and we'll just move everything over. So they canceled the project in 2004. In 2005, they started it again. Notice they also spent a tremendous amount of money figuring out what to build and redefining and relearning, and they started development, and they canceled it again. And this happens like 3 or 4 times throughout this period. And guess what? They still don't have anything on the web today. Right? If they had launched something back here, they could have spent less money and launched something. They would have at least learned something. Would it have been perfect for the next year? Probably not. Would it have solved all their needs? No. But they didn't have any tools or any processes to get the business to agree on what to do. Right? And so you can see and I'm working with this client now. It's a story that's plagued them for many years, right? And it's significantly impacting their business. Their risk exposure was way too high, right? So what was wrong? Well, first of all, the release cycles were way too long, right? That contributed to high transaction costs. They were trying to release too many features per release. That contributed to large batch sizes, and they were not validating these decisions early enough. And so they had slow feedback cycles, right? And all of those increase risk. So this is a quote from Tim Brown, president of IDEO, and I think it's interesting. He says, most innovations come from a process of rigorous examination through which ideas are identified. Great ideas don't come from great minds or these special, unique individuals that have fantastic ideas. That they come from, or what they have found, and IDEO is a huge design firm, what they've come from is they follow a pretty rigorous process. And a lot of companies that I see who are successfully launching products are following a process very similar to theirs. And that's what we're sort of going to talk about. And that process sort of revolves around reducing transaction costs to enable smaller batch sizes and faster feedback. And this is the quote from Don Reinerston, right? The transaction costs, if I can reduce those, that's this area of control. Batch sizes helps reduce time or gives me more time and faster feedback information. By controlling or by reducing those things, I'm gonna lower my risk. So transaction cost. David Anderson has said several years ago that you can think of waste in terms of economic terms. Failure load, transaction cost, and coordination cost. So these transaction costs are how much money am I spending at the beginning and in the product to get something in the market. You could look at this smaller on an iteration or release, but on an entire project, you're spending a lot of money up front. And our client who's in the building medical devices, they are spending a lot of money in this upfront process of figuring out what to build and going through all their standing operating procedures. And so their transaction costs were extremely high. Another example from Don, you have holding cost and transaction cost. By reducing my transaction cost, I can determine my optimal batch size, where my batch size is a function of transaction cost and holding cost, right? Do you know what I mean when I say holding cost? The example I know he's using is buying eggs, right? If I buy 1 egg a day, go to the store every day, my transaction costs are really high. If I buy a year's supply and I only go to the store once, it's really low. But in the year supply of eggs, I have a large cost of holding them. I have a huge refrigerator, or whatever. There's a cost to holding that many. So there's a way to determine your optimal batch size, right? And the way we did it, started with this customer, is we simply started value mapping and looking at some of their projects. We identified the things they were doing that was value adding, the non-value adding but essential, and the non-value adding, non-essential. And I know Mary has a great presentation on value stream mapping. If you, I think it's out on the web, you could probably find. But we spent a lot of time trying to understand in the processes what these were, because it was the non-value adding work that was driving a lot of their costs. And for this company, what we found out, there was a lot of non-value that they said was essential. It was essential because they're in the medical device industry, and they were pretty risk averse. They were I mean, they don't want to kill anybody, but obviously, but they're also risk averse because if they screw up and they don't have the right documentation and the FDA audits them, they get a warning letter, it's very, very bad. They get multiple warning letters, the FDA basically comes in and runs their business. So they're extremely risk averse to an audit from the FDA. So they were doing tremendous amount of work, huge transaction costs to avoid that. What they didn't realize, or what they're starting to realize, is while they protected some risk against the FDA, their market risk they exposed them to by huge transaction costs and long release cycles and hard batch sizes is increasing the risk of actually launching a product. And so what they're kind of saying now is, gosh, there's all the stuff that we thought was essential. How much of it's really essential? What does the FDA say we really have to do versus what we think we have to do? And maybe we'll take a little more risk there to lower our risk when actually launching the product, right? So we did this activity with them and spent a lot of time trying to understand what are the things we can do to reduce their transaction costs, where theirs were mostly a lot of these non-value-added work that they felt like was being directed by the FDA. So after reducing transaction cost, we turned our attention to batch size. And so there's a great article called The 6 Myths of Product Development that Don Reinertsen was a co-author. If you haven't read it, I would suggest reading it. But in it says, many companies, in an effort to be innovative, throw in every possible bell and whistle without fully considering important factors such as value to the customer and ease of use. They go on to say, managers should focus on figuring out whether the deletion of any proposed feature might improve a particular project. Products get closer to perfection when no more features can be eliminated. How many people feel like they operate like this today? Right? There you go. Apple's a good example of probably doing that, right? Simplicity is a big thing. So I have an example here, a short video we can watch of sort of seeing maybe some of this play out.
We're seeing reports that people don't know what to do at an intersection.
Some people are slowing, others are accelerating, a small percentage are backing up, and the rest are crashing.
So we're looking for signage that makes people want to bring their vehicle to a standstill before they continue.
Essentially a sign that tells people to stop.
Essentially. If you look on page 16 of your brief, you'll notice that about 50% of HVMs are female.
Yeah, HVMs?
Home vehicle managers, but don't neglect the other 50% who are primarily male.
Okay, so we're basically targeting all drivers?
No, we're targeting women, but we're also targeting men secondarily.
But really think this thing through if you could, okay? We're looking for stopping power. Yeah, and still get it by tomorrow.
I love where you've taken this. You guys nailed it.
Yeah, I think this is pretty spot on. Having said that, we're getting some additional details from upper management since the initial briefing we gave you. I think we have the opportunity to make this piece hit a little harder.
Yeah, harder.
The main message is still the stopping occasion, but we're also going to need to include personal safety cues, any appropriate right-of-way legal, and our partner logos.
And as far as red goes, we love it. But we got word from our creative standard group that the fire department kind of owns red, so we're going to have to lighten it up on the Pantone scale.
Lighten it up like pink?
Based on our female target market, I don't see a downside.
Yeah, well, what about our male secondary market?
Maybe we do pink signs in the female intersection zones and blue ones in the male ones.
And which intersections are the female ones?
I got it. Why don't you go with pink and blue until we get you an answer on that?
Brilliant.
Way to crack the code. I think we're done here.
The only thing I can see is bumping that logo up just a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
We just got word from the UN that we can't use their logo.
Then let's bump up the EPA logo.
Okay.
I think somewhere on there we need to show the stopping occasion.
It needs to be telegraphic.
Yeah, some people just don't read, you know?
It's great. Can we try a new line? I showed it to my daughter and she didn't really get it.
Yeah, circles feel very 90s to me. Can we try a different shape, too?
Can we try a softer headline, though?
And a web address, in case people want more info?
Maybe a verse that says new. If it doesn't make it too busy.
I keep imagining a line of cars stacked up at the intersection.
Yeah, I think we need a more complete call to action so people know exactly what to do after the pause.
I'd also like to see maybe some people smiling on it. You know, to remind drivers that stopping isn't required, it's also fun.
You guys got all that? Wow! I'd have to say, I think you finally got it.
You guys did an amazing job of fitting all of our suggestions in on one side.
Can you throw together a look of success for a selling meeting this afternoon?
And that's how it all comes together, guys. I mean, if I were at that intersection, I'd stop.
Me too.
I don't see how anyone couldn't. Let's get these things printed and out the door.
Guys, we're a little disappointed in how this thing is testing, so we've got some minor tweaks we're looking into.
So obviously funny, how many people that's too close to home, like, right? We oftentimes are finding ourselves fighting the situation of wanting to add too many features, right? So my friend Jeff Patton often will ask, does your organization have a problem? And we're all friends here, so we can freely admit this if we do. It comes from a gambling addicts blog, and what we've done is just replace the gambling with something sort of more appropriate for us. So let's see. Inability to stop or reduce adding new product features. Obsessive or compulsive thinking about new product features. Continues adding new product features despite negative consequences. Loss of job, relationship, opportunities. Increased tolerance, needing more and more frequent feature additions to experience the same rush. Emotional symptoms of withdrawal when you stop or reduce adding new product features. Needing to add new product features to improve your mood, escape problems, win back losses. Breaking the law in order to get budget money or recover feature losses. Asking for financial assistance as a result of adding new product features. Denial of feature adding problem or lying to friends and family about the behavior. Frequent mood changes. Right? We're all friends. How many people? Yeah. Right, so this is obviously, making light, but it's a serious problem. It really impacts organizations, and they're not sure what to do about it, right? So one of the things that we talk a lot about is reducing batch size through outcome-based planning. Don Reinerson says, articulating the problem that developers will solve is the most underrated part of the innovation process. So this is kind of what we like to do. First, talk about what are our product goals and named outcomes. Now I'll warn you, this slide is a whole probably presentation in and of itself, but we want to focus on the outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish? Go back to the stop sign. We just want vehicles to stop, right? A named desired outcome. We'll identify the users that we think will use the solution to meet their needs, and then based on the users, we'll come up with a whole list of tasks and activities or ways that they're going to use the software. Bob said, a quote from one of his articles, the business exists to reduce the risk to its customers in the least risky way for itself. To reduce your customers' risk, you need a product or service that provides more time, control, and or information than they already have. So we are going to try to focus and prioritize our outcomes based on reducing our customer risk and our business risk. So if you go back to our example here, one of the questions I'll ask our customers is which of these outcomes reduces your risk or your customer's risk the most? And it's really easy to talk about which gives you more or your customer more time, control, or information. And from that, it's usually not too hard to pick an outcome to at least focus on, or at least prioritize them and start with the first one. Once I have an outcome, usually it does not impact all of the user constituencies that we've identified. And so that picking one outcome will limit ourselves to a couple of personas or a couple of user constituents. And then oftentimes the features that they need are not the complete set we identified, right? And so it's a really simple tool to help us go from outcomes to a small set that we can focus on delivering initially and validate and test. Oftentimes we'll refer to this as outputs, right? Features, requirements, specifications, prototype outputs, and the goals as outcomes. We want to maximize outcomes, minimize output, right? And that's a very simple idea, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with executives and looking at projects that had failed, or like the example of the client that was trying to get something on the web, and I just simply asked, what was the outcome? What was the stated business outcome for why you started this project in 2004? His response was, we wanted to get something on the web. They still haven't done. I mean, still haven't done it. I mean, we lose sight of the outcomes. And I mean, this is probably a whole presentation of itself, and I don't want to trivialize. I know it's not always easy, and it's going to be harder or easier depending on your context and your customers or your organization. But I found it to be a very easy tool to typically get people to buy into and say, let's talk about outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish by building this product? And now who's involved with that and what features, activities? Most of us, myself included, want to go to prioritizing features and tasks or whatever. Think about buying a car or building a house. We probably spend a tremendous amount of time prioritizing this, not what the outcome is, what we're really trying to do. So by prioritizing outcomes, it's going to reduce our risk. It's going to give us smaller batch sizes. It's going to help create a shared vision. We're only going to spend time building what's needed. It kind of provides a systematic way for reducing scope that I typically can get people to buy into. And reduced scope equals reduced upfront investment equals reduced risk. So once we've reduced our transaction cost and our batch sizes, that enables us to have sort of these faster feedback cycles. And faster feedback cycles are going to also reduce our risk by enabling learning, reducing WIP and unvalidated decisions, ensuring we don't build the wrong thing, making sure market conditions haven't changed, be more responsive to customers. Go back to the company who was trying to put something on the web, and that initial development, the first project, that was over a year. If they had picked something much smaller in a much smaller time frame, the other projects on the horizon wouldn't have sort of coming into view, and you'd have got to the point where, like, let's stop and we'll just pick it up next year when we start this new project. And then that takes a long time, and well, wait a minute, let's just wait because we're going to release this new product and we're going to want that included, and you get into this sort of cascading, never-ending situation. This is from an article by Todd Little called Schedule Estimation and Uncertainty Surrounding the Code of Uncertainty. If you went to his talk yesterday, I think he talked a little bit about this. Code of uncertainty, at least as defined, there's this sort of knowledge or this sort of expectation that as time progresses, our risk will go down, right? We'll gain more information and risks will go down the further along we go. When Todd did an experiment in his organization, what they found was this. They asked the projects to re-estimate along the way, and as time went on, and you can see they didn't actually converge. They never really got better. And I think the reason there is that we're not intentional about the risks that we're trying to eliminate or what we're trying to learn. It doesn't really matter. If you have something on the bottom of your backlog and something on the top, and the two are unrelated, just by doing the top one and completing it, you're not necessarily reducing the risk for one on the bottom. Is that There you go. Todd's in the room, so make sure I didn't misstate anything. Right, so we need to be intentional about the risks and realize that not all risks are created equal. In this article in the Harvard Business Review called Beating the Odds When Launching a Venture, they identified 3 risks: deal killer risks, path dependent risk, and easy to win, high ROI. Deal killer risk means the project basically stops. It's kind of a table stake. The path dependent says you come up to a point when there are multiple paths and you need to pick one. And oftentimes people will try to do multiple paths to sort of hedge their bets instead of sort of picking one, doing some stuff, validating it, and moving on. The article also talks about then that the risks and value are inversely proportional. So when you remove risk, you also increase value. But because they're not all created equal, it sort of matters what order you do them in. In this case, if risk 4 and 6 were deal killer and path dependent risks, you might want to move them up to the front. By doing so, the curve might change to look something like this. I've reduced my deal killers early, and what I've actually done is gained more value earlier on than prolonging that, right? So it's important to understand and identify the risks that you're trying to reduce and be intentional about it along the way. Reduce risks at each step before making any significant financial investments, operational commitments, right? That kind of ties in a little bit to the real options stuff that, again, you heard Todd talk about yesterday. So let's talk about some real world impacts, things where we've worked with companies doing this. So the first one is a local credit union in Indianapolis called Forum Credit Union. And SEP rewrote their online banking and mobile web app. So they didn't buy something, they built it themselves. They had an existing product in place. Their customer base, all the feedback they got, loved the product. Seems pretty easy to go from that to an update and adding some things like financial management and some text-based banking. And we went in and I said, okay, well, what is the outcome? What are the outcomes? We looked at the whole scope of things and cost it, and it was way too high. And they started going back and thinking like, okay, well, how much is this? How much is this? How much is this? To try to cut things like most people do. And instead we said, look, let's go back. What is the outcome? What are you trying to do? And they all said their ultimate outcome. The reason why they were doing this is they wanted to add 5,000 checking accounts in the next 5 years. I said, okay. We looked at all the personas or all the users we had created, and that really targeted like one, Mobile Mark. And so we focused on him and the product implications to him. And as we were going through trying to decide what to build, we simply asked ourselves the question, do we feel like this is going to add more checking accounts in the next 5 years? Or is it going to help maintain the ones we have? If the answer was yes, then we put it in one side. And if the answer was clearly no, like it was for a lot of things, we threw it aside. And so, the total scope reduced by about 40%. Of all the things they didn't feel like was going to directly contribute to the stated outcome. And for those things we weren't sure about, we tried to do some small experiments and figure that out. And that helped us sort of divvy it up. The total cost went way down. When they released it, they didn't start increasing their membership. The frequency of logins for the existing members actually went up. They didn't anticipate that. The members liked using it more. Member satisfaction improved. Mobile, which they sort of had before, but they've been averaging about 7,000 downloads per month, and for this credit union, about 100,000 members. That's pretty good. And at least according to some of their numbers that they've shared with me, they're leading the industry, their industry, in terms of adoption and use from the product. So they were reaching their outcome. If we had just started with sort of the traditional way, let's build this big thing. Let's not try to validate anything early. Let's not have a way for reducing scope. I think it would have been one of those failed projects that either would never have been released or they would have overspent and ultimately at the end, probably not have felt as happy with the solution. Here's a healthcare company. They decided to launch a mobile app. They failed to sort of prioritize outcomes and estimates, and as soon as they prioritized by some using cost estimate, they ignored path-dependent risks. And it took multiple years and multiple millions of dollars to release an Android app. And currently they're struggling. Their transaction costs were so high, if you think about who they're competing with, some small little company that can turn out updates every month, 2 months, they estimate based on the size of their transaction cost, the earliest they could turn around and do an update is every 8 months. That's hard to compete in the mobile market if that's the place. And again, it goes back to the reducing risk from the FDA as opposed to market risk, right? And that's something that they're talking about changing. How can we do this? What would it look like to release every 6 months or every 3 months? What would we have to do? What risk would that expose us to the FDA, right? Here's an example of a research laboratory that was looking at building an electronic lab notebook. We did some of this, what I call discovery, identifying outcomes and stuff. They identified a deal killer risk. We conducted some experiments to validate it. They ultimately decided not to build. They ended up buying an off-the-shelf solution and sort of customizing it. They had allocated over $800,000 to try to build this product. They didn't need to build it. It was not going to even satisfy the outcome that they had stated. They had stated an outcome, but they hadn't actually done the work to see how does that impact what we're going to build, and will what we build will ultimately even solve that. In that case, it didn't. So summary, right? Launching products is hard. I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert about launching products. But I see some of the same problems, in a lot of the organizations we work with. And so for us, simply to reduce risk and help them, things we're looking at is how do we reduce transaction costs? How do we make it easier to release more times? How do we reduce the batch size? How do we sort of figure out a systematic way for controlling how much we're going to build? And how do we enable faster feedback cycles? So, by looking at risks in the right order. That's it. Any questions?